Welcome to Accelerating Awakening Show number one. This is going to be an interesting one. We're going to go deep into critical thinking. We're looking at, is MAGA a Trump cult? When you hear those words, that question, how do you immediately respond to that? Chances are, if you watch CNN still, if you're part of the socialist communist programming agenda of the extreme left, then you think, well, of course it is. And if you're in the majority who identifies themselves as MAGA or who voted for President Trump, then you probably think, oh no, of course not. MAGA is not a cult. It's a movement for freedom, for self-empowerment, for wealth, prosperity, America first. It's all of us doing the work required of every one of us to live our best lives. That's probably how you respond to seeing those words, is MAGA a Trump cult? And yet, let's look into this with an open mind. Are you willing to play here? Are you willing to critically think through your own beliefs or programming? We're also bridging here. Like this is the Accelerating Awakening show number one. This is a new twist, shall we say. So we started with the Operation Greatness podcast, and I think we did 83 shows there. And then I think I did 4 shows that were 8billionasone.com shows. So 8billionasone.com is the website where we're all coming together as our human family. We're coming from love, peace, prosperity, joy, happiness, well-being, success, being of greater service to each other, unity, instead of scarcity, fear, lack, ego. Where all of that is crumbling. All of the systems of oppression and enslavement are they're falling apart. They're just naturally going away. They're becoming extinct. And so now we're moving into a new era very quickly. It's called Accelerating Awakening. That's where every one of us are seeing our stuff. We're not hiding it. We're not putting it down. We're not oppressing it or ignoring it or denying it. No, we're looking at it. We're bringing it to the surface. So that's what better question to ask to accelerate our awakening than, is MAGA a Trump cult? So we're also bridging here. Notice that we're not saying the leftist extremists who just are brainwashed by CNN and the mainstream narrative of hatred, fear, division, disempowerment. We're not making them wrong. We're just asking everyone to see the truth, to see what's real, what's valid for us. And while the truth is not arbitrary, like for this person and not for this one, no, the truth is the truth. So we're looking at all of this in this conversation. So this is a pretty important one, to open your mind and really see your beliefs. What is real? What is so? Or what was programming? So this is a pretty provocative headline or show title, is MAGA a Trump cult? Where was that inspired? There is a book called The Cult of Trump, and I am not endorsing this book. I want to make that very clear. I'm just using that as a reference point. It's by a guy, I don't even really want to promote him or his book, because I believe that he is manipulated, or he's exploiting the manipulation of those thousands, I don't know how many people, the ratings have, like of CNN, have dropped, I think, more than 80%. And that's good because people are awakening to the manipulation, to the fraud, to the programming, to the brainwashing of the leftist communist news network and other communist owned or infiltrated companies. And anyway, so this gentleman, he wrote a book called The Cult of Trump. And he calls himself in the subheadline, the subtitle of the book, A Leading Cult Expert Explains How the President Uses Mind Control. And, well, this was written in response to President Trump's first administration. And I would say, I would infer that this author of this book, which is itself propaganda, I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't say that because I didn't read the book. I'm not going to spend money on this kind of garbage. I'll call it that. That's my impression of it. I think he's purveying one side. I think he's promoting the animosity or the agenda of the mainstream media, which is like I was a journalist myself for 10 years. I was in newspapers for 10 years. I did radio for 3.5 years and TV for about 1.5 years. And I was 6 years as a reporter and 4 years as assistant managing editor. And so anyway, I know I study the media and I'm sort of like I can see behind the scenes of what they're doing. And it was very meaningful to see more recently, like this was on, do you remember Nicole Shanahan? She was Bobby Kennedy's choice for vice president. And she has a podcast which is pretty interesting when I've seen it. And she had a gentleman he worked at Newsweek for I think like 20, I don't remember exactly. Maybe it was Hollywood Reporter. I think he worked there for 22.5 years. And maybe he worked at Newsweek for 8 years or so. I think he was like 30 or 32 years in journalism himself. And he talked about how at Newsweek, I think he said 80% or 90%, it was like one or two of those, I think it was, let's say 80% of all headlines in Newsweek, they could be Trump is evil. In other words, it's very much promoting an agenda, and that is brainwashing attempt, at least. So this guy who wrote this book, The Cult of Trump, he used to be a Moonie. Remember that cult from, I don't know if that was the 1980s or 90s or something, maybe even the 70s, by Reverend Sung Young Moon, I believe his name was. And this guy, who wrote this book, The Cult of Trump, he was part of that cult, is my understanding. I didn't look into his book too much. I just wanted to use this as a way for us to look at is, well, first of all, which one is the real cult? Is it MAGA or is it the extreme left and the mainstream media and, the Biden, Kamala, Obama, Clinton, Pelosi, that whole system of totalitarian abuse, control, oppression, and anyone, like Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg famously, I think it was like 400 and some $1 million that he spent as far as even vote oppression, like to manipulate the 2020 election. And, I realize he's sort of recognizing that the tide has turned, and then he wanted to cuddle up or cozy up to President Trump more recently. But anyway, by your words and deeds you shall know him. And of course, the Twitter files famously oppressed, manipulated the 2020 vote. And that was just one company that went, where the truth was revealed and it was pervasive, oppressing, silencing, censoring the whole Hunter Biden laptop thing that was exposed by, what was that? That publication in New York, US, I don't know, I forgot the name of it now. See, it doesn't have top of mind awareness for me because it was silenced so thoroughly by the Biden administration, complete election interference, and where are the charges for that? Anyway, the so is that the real cult of the communists in power in all aspects of America, or is it MAGA, the Trump cult? So let's look at this question from both sides and objectively. I mean, when I was in the newspaper business and radio and TV, well, TV wasn't really news where I was doing that. It was, I had my own personal development, inspirational show. And anyway, but radio, I did some public service type shows. And yet that was more local, it wasn't national. And so the newspaper business, I was part of that, and I went deep into that, where every day I would lay out the front page every weekday, Monday through Friday, I would lay out the front page and I would determine what's my lead story and how to position it. And we valued integrity still in the news when I was there. It was, I was seeing the writing on the wall, quite honestly, that, the corporate structure was changing. Smaller papers were being eaten up by bigger papers. And like my newspaper was owned by Thompson Newspapers when I was there. And then it was bought up by Gannett shortly after that. And I'm glad I got out before Gannett, the owners of USA Today, took over because USA Today is one of the most extreme examples of propaganda, false narrative, manipulation is what it honestly is, like yellow journalism at its, well, finest, meaning at its worst, or the least amount of prioritizing truth and presenting the facts honestly. I mean, when I was in the newspaper business, we trusted the intelligence of our audience and we did our best to accurately, fairly, objectively present both sides and let each person decide what's best for themselves and their families and their communities. That was respect. That was honor. And I still value that myself because that's who I am. And so let's look at this objectively. Is MAGA a cult? Or is it a movement of people who are tired of government, big government, socialist government, and oppression, like what I call Fraud 1.0, as part of the attempted totalitarian takeover that began well, it came to the forefront, and so no one could ignore it back in March of 2020 during it's called the COVID PSYOP also. And that was, like the 2001 9/11 quote attack, well, or tax, plural, that was all government PSYOP. That was, I hope you understand all this stuff. That was done to usher in the Patriot Act, which gave up tremendous freedom for every American. It was a collusion. It was about oppression and control. It was the government attacking the people of America. Anyway, I mean, I hope you understand all of these things. It's well documented, and you just have to open your eyes if you want to see the truth. But I mean, so we're looking at this objectively. So is MAGA a cult, or is it a group of people who require freedom? Or we're like the new freedom fighters in the modern world, like expelling, like the original colonists expelled British tyranny, like Mahatma Gandhi organizing 1 billion Indians to expel tyranny in, well, from the crown of Britain as well, which is still so pervasive in this country to this day. If you didn't know that, we'll talk about that perhaps at the right moment. And anyway, it's all about oppression. That's what let's just say the powers behind the scenes, the force, the man behind the curtain running the show is really about. It's oppression, tyranny, totalitarian control. And MAGA is a group of people who are fighting against that. We are the strong males, and you know that if we were strong as humanity, this whole fraud 1.0, the COVID psyop, as part of the attempted totalitarian takeover, that would have never even been attempted if we had strong men in our society. Because they know that if there was an attack on our sovereignty, they would be up in arms and they would quell that invasion. And this whole border crisis thing, of course, none of that would have been possible if we were strong as men in our country, right? And strong women too, keeping their men focused, not getting distracted by the dumbing device, the agent of division, destruction, distraction, disempowerment, discombobulation, despair, the dumbing device. That's how this was able to move forward and have such a debilitating effect on humanity. So you can see what my perspective is on MAGA. I don't see it as a cult. And yet I want you to ask that question of yourself. Because, well, let's look at what this gentleman who wrote this book, The Cult of Trump, who calls himself a cult expert. Let's look at his criteria. And I did not buy his book. I wouldn't support him, just to be very clear on that. I'm just looking at the preview function of his book where it's being sold. So he's talking about the study of brainwashing. I don't want to read a lot of this, but I just want to look at this as a way to critically see, is MAGA a cult, and are people who identify themselves with this movement, which I think is a freedom movement of freedom fighters, are they brainwashed? So let's look at what he says is a study of brainwashing. This is from The Cult of Trump. So milieu control, the leader or inner circle has complete control of information, how and where it is communicated, disseminated, and consumed, resulting in nearly complete isolation from the outside world. See, already that doesn't fit MAGA because the mainstream media is run by the communists who are promoting the Trump is evil agenda. It's complete propaganda. That's completely removed from reality, right? And President Trump doesn't have control over that. And the alternative media They are even asking the questions like well, Elon Musk and President Trump, I mean, I think that was just scripted. I think that was a ruse to divide people further, even because MAGA was so prominent. So many people are standing up to freedom, for freedom, and standing up to oppression. And, and I think that that was just scripted. You could say by the powers, or like the man behind the curtain, the communists, the authoritarian tyrants pulling the strings behind the scenes. And yet, so like under Biden, I think this describes the extremist, communist infiltrators, invaders of the positions of power in the world, especially in America, where they had almost complete control over information. I mean, even like the Twitter files, suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story. And that sounds like that is a cult to me by this guy's own criteria. Would you agree with that? So let's continue to look more. That's one factor of brainwashing, milieu control. That was his, what, first point, I think? Or that was his second point. Well, that's his first point, yeah. Mystical manipulation, he calls the second point. A group of individual experiences are contrived, engineered, and even staged in a way that makes them seem spontaneous and even supernatural or divine. That sounds like the quote J6 quote riots, which was done by the corrupt FBI under Comey and Biden. That was all a staged manipulation. And I mean, you've seen the videos like Tucker Carlson narrating this from the footage that he got, the 20 some hours, I think it was, of footage, where the Capitol Police were like, here, come on inside. I'm going to give you a tour. And that was all a complete ruse, a manipulation. What's his third point? So that again suggests that it's the communist infiltration that is that the real cult and not MAGA. Would you agree? So the third point is demand for purity, viewing the world in simple binary terms such as black versus white. Well, which side is promoting the false lie of racism of the other side, and which side is making race the issue? That's the communist side, not the MAGA side. So there again, that sounds like the other side, the communists, the extreme left, the leftists are the cult. Is that pretty obvious by now to every one of us? Are you seeing that yourself? What about number 4, confession? Personal boundaries are broken down and destroyed. Every thought, feeling, or action, past or present, that does not conform to the group's roles should be shared or confessed, publicly or to a personal monitor. Okay, well, confession. How do you respond to that? Like, okay, so like for example on Twitter X, I have 140,000 or no, what is it? 100 and let's see, what is it anyway? 183,000 people following me there. I'm showing this on the screen if you're watching the video of this show. And most of them, I mean, I don't know how many, but a lot of them, let's say more than half probably, which would mean most, are President Trump supporters. We are MAGA. We care about freedom. And if I were to say, I mean, there's acceptance, there's tolerance of people who have different views. I mean, like the libertarians are different than the Republicans. We're both conservative. We both love freedom, except the libertarians are more like, get government out of my lives, out of my life, out of our lives. And except the libertarians just want to be left alone, right? And the conservatives are more like, well, we want to get communists out of power. Because we, the people, have all the power. And then there's other groups in there as well. I mean, like some people think that President Trump is just an hired actor and that it's the globalists who just said that Kamala is way too stupid or nobody likes her. And, there are even people who say that Biden, like this was his greatest act of revenge because he was, well, anyway, I mean, of course, he's an evil person, a very corrupt individual, but I don't know if he's really evil. I think he's probably just a corrupt, sold his soul to money, power. He didn't, I don't know. But anyway, some people say that he basically gave the Democrats, the communists, no choice but to install Kamala, without going through any democratic process. Nobody voted for her in any primaries because there were none. She was just installed in the regime change where they threw Biden under the bus because he was a useful idiot and he had no more usefulness left in him. So they disposed of him because that's what the communists do. And anyway, that they installed, but it's been said that he gave them no choice other than to go with her. And that's a really interesting interview that I saw. I think that was with Mark Levin. I think it was him. He was on, I don't know, it was somebody on Tucker Carlson, I think. And it was like somebody who, maybe it was no, I guess it wasn't Mark Levin. It was a journalist from Washington. I don't think I'd heard of him before. But Tucker was like, really? And then he made a very strong case for Biden kind of like having his revenge on the Democratic Party, which, gave him hundreds of millions of dollars in wealth by his corruption. But when they disposed of him, he sort of like stuck it to them by leaving them with no other choice but Kamala. I thought that was very interesting. And then, so anyway, the powers running things, there are those in the conservative side or the freedom movement side who believe that even President Trump is an actor and that the powers running they're called the controllers by many people, that they saw that that Kamala was, if, yeah, they could do the fraud like they did in 2020, and yet nobody would believe it because she's such an unlikable person. And so they knew they had to award Trump the victory, and yet that they're anyway. So what I'm saying is this doesn't sound like there's tolerance of other people and other views, and racism was just something that the Democrats, they're the party of the KKK, they're the original racists in the world, and they're still so they made racism the issue as part of the manipulation. So that sounds like, again, the Democrats are the cult and the MAGA or the conservatives or the freedom lovers have tolerance of other views, other cultures. So let's see what his fifth factor is. Sacred science. Group ideology or doctrine is considered to be absolutely, scientifically, and morally true. No room for questions or alternative viewpoints. Well, I mean, who's behind the COVID fraud, the COVID psyop? I call it Fraud 1.0 as part of the attempted totalitarian takeover. That's the globalists, the communists. And they're the ones that the mainstream media, the agents of evil, of oppression, they're the ones who they were all following the script from the CIA that said, trust the science, trust the science, trust the science. Don't question it, just trust it, just obey, comply without even thinking about. I mean, of course, that the mask was just something arbitrary, allegedly made up by Fauci, the most corrupt, evil person perhaps out there, other than maybe Bill Gates or Soros. I mean, those guys probably are the pinnacle of evil. And anyway, I supposedly Fauci just made up that thing, and there was so much evidence against the merit of that and the social distancing. I think he just made up that too to make people further disconnected and compliant, obedient. And I mean, if you complied with that, I hope you didn't, or at least you knew that you cannot trust the manipulation. And so that sounds like, again, the cult of the globalists more broadly than just the extremists, the leftists or the communists, the globalists. They don't want you to question anything. And people in the conservative freedom family, we're willing to hear people's views because we still value critical thinking, right? How about his point number 6? Loading the language. Members learn new vocabulary that is designed to constrict their thinking into absolute black and white thought, stopping cliches that conform to group ideology. Like he uses the example of lock her up, which should have happened. You know what I'm talking about, the reference in 2016 to the audience yelling in the auditoriums, lock her up, meaning Hillary completely betrayed America. And she, I mean, how all that insecure data on her personal hard drives that were probably hacked by all of these world powers. Why is she roaming free, causing more destruction? She should have been locked up. No question about that. And she should still be punished fully for her crimes. And yet, the language, here again, trust the science. Don't question anything. Don't think for yourself. Just comply with the manipulation of the globalists, of the cult of globalism. That's the real cult. You see that, right? Because MAGA, I mean, to me, this guy who wrote this book is like he is seeing the world from the standpoint of having been brainwashed by a cult. So he's looking for examples of that, but why doesn't he look in the, well, what's obvious in plain sight? It's the globalists running the show behind the politicians, behind the masks. That's the real source of the brainwashing. Is that so obvious to you? I mean, we could go on. He's got other examples here, like doctrine over person. I mean, that sounds like the Communist Party. Like what did Kamala say? What was her thing? Equity. We all have nothing and we're happy. I mean, that's the globalist promise of the World Economic Forum. Oh, yeah, that guy too. What's his name? Klaus Schwab. He's one of the embodiments of evil as well. And now he stepped down because he was so evil and so obviously evil. And anyone who is part of that world or the whole Epstein Island world, well, they're obviously evil and they're corrupt and they're, what's that word when you have something over on someone? They're, they're in the complete power or control over the globalists, tyranny. It's so obvious to me, all of this. And is this as obvious to you? Share your thoughts about this. Post about your own, how you're relating to these points, and you're seeing what the real cult is, I hope, and you're saying no to that brainwashing and you're not ever giving CNN or any of these corrupt mainstream quote unquote news organizations anymore, right? You're not making them any money. In fact, you're standing against them and you're getting your news from honorable, honest, ethical sources, and you're using critical thinking about everything here, right? So this guy that wrote The Cult of Trump, I don't know if he's very bright or if he's just still brainwashed or if he's just exploiting the question of he's taking a position and then I don't know, it doesn't seem like his arguments are very sound, and I think he's missing the real brainwashing. So is MAGA a Trump cult? What do you think? What are your thoughts about this? I'm sharing my thoughts about it, and yet I believe I'm looking at this critically as a neutral observer, and I know that President Trump makes an easy target because he's kind of brash and he's kind of got a very large ego, and maybe he's got thin skin, so he's an easy target, and yet he's a figure who has captivated hundreds of millions of people, and he's become the central symbol of freedom. And we value freedom and we require freedom. That's why we're all coming together, 8 billion as one, through 8billionasone.com. And this is our accelerating awakening because we're all seeing the truth. We're moving out of the manipulation, the brainwashing, the lies, the oppression, and we're commanding our destiny now. We're all coming together, 8 billion as one, through 8billionasone.com. Make sure that you're part of our 8billionasone.com mastermind. Absolutely. And we are all accelerating awakening. We're staying focused on what matters most, which is living your divine design, duty, destiny, dharma. Not letting anything stop you or stand in your way. That's why you're here. And you have so much more power than you can ever even imagine or comprehend. And now you're living that, and nothing matters more than that. So all of us are working together in accelerating awakening on the planet through our 8billionasone.com mastermind. So make sure that you're doing this with everyone connected with you. So right here, already go back to the beginning of this podcast. Accelerating Awakening show number 1 is MAGA a Trump cult, and share your thoughts about each point and actively lead every one of your online friends through accelerating awakening themselves and joining us in how we are uniting humanity, liberating humanity together through our 8billionasone.com mastermind. How does this feel? This is required of every one of us, right? So do it. Be that leader. You are the inspired visionary leader of everyone. It is your gift. It is your blessing to serve, to lead, inspire, transform, and liberate. Doing a little, L-I-T-L, little more today and being of greater service. How does that feel? For you to be that leader of every one of your online friends. This is how we are all accelerating awakening together. We're doing this through our 8billionasone.com mastermind. So make sure you're joining us there. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments here, and share all the posts you're making from this Accelerating Awakening show number 1 to me personally. Send that by email, dan@danclatt.com. I love you. I believe in you. I know how much you matter. I know that you are here to transform the world, and this is the higher purpose of your life. This is the gift you are, because after all, you are God's gift to the world. Thank you for really hearing this and living this. Thank you very much.